What to main in 10.2 and what are our early thoughts? The new tier sets have winners and losers, and the damage output on some specs is crazy. I will tell you what my main choices are and why, and also help you choose something you can main as well in 10.2. First of all, what are my current choices? Because I haven't decided yet, and there are reasons for all of these choices. I am actually thinking about Druid because, well, there are obvious reasons to think about Druid, and surprisingly enough, those will not be the main reasons as to why I'm playing Druid. Sure, Moonkin and Feral and Bear are getting all sorts of cool forms in 10.2 that you should collect as a Druid player, whether or not you're maining Druid, but that's not just it. I'm going to be looking at Balance and Feral mainly as the DPS players, and of course Bear on the side. Druid is only one of the classes that I will be looking at, Hunter being the second, with of course kind of all three specs, because usually I kind of like to play all of the specs of a class, and Hunter is no exception because I oddly enough enjoy all three, not to the same level, and we kind of will get into that as well. And of course Warrior, because that's kind of always on the table for me, with Arms and Fury once again as DPS choices, and Protection on the side, probably in Mythic Plus since I don't particularly like tanking in raids, and we'll get to that as well. And last but not least, Death Knight with Unholy and Frost as options, because I always choose between the two, although we will see how viable that will be this time around. And Blood once again as a tank, because I'm a tank player. Now I will be talking about my choices, but I will also mention Marcelian and Mokti and Sunshade's choices as well, since they also do have their own classes that they normally go through, even though you don't really see them on videos because they do a lot of things on the side. Marcelian is of course looking at Rogue as a Rogue player, especially with the rework for Assassination and Sub mostly. He usually plays some Outlaw every now and again. Paladin for Red, he's not able to press the change specialization on Paladin that much, and Mage with Fire and Frost because Arcane does not exist in Marcelian's language. While Mokti, our boy who you see editing a lot of the stuff, is going to be looking at Enhancement Shaman as is currently main, and DK as well, similar to me, although I don't know if he's going to be dabbling in Blood that much. And Sunshade, as always, she kind of really wants to play Demo Warlock as much as possible, but as a raid leader, she'll probably default back to BM Hunter. We'll see exactly how things shape up as the patch launches. But with that out of the way, the tier sets are definitely a good point to choose a particular class. If you're the kind of person that likes to play different alts and different specs and different classes with each patch, I don't know, maybe you like Flavor of the Month, or maybe you like to play what is fun and interesting that patch, which is kind of how I usually engage with all of the specs. Tier sets are definitely on the menu to consider because they do augment your playstyle quite a bit. Now, once again, as a slight disclaimer, I will be analyzing the tier sets that we know of today because they will be iterated upon, buffed and nerfed and adjusted, and some mechanics hopefully changed for some of them because they don't look too good, but so far so good. The tier sets are looking decent. Now, when it comes to Druid, the balanced tier set in terms of its strength, its 2-piece and 4-piece is okay. It's 3.5% damage increase for the 2-piece, so far that of mine, and 11.5% for the 4-piece. Now, this is just analyzing the damage increase as of not wearing any tier piece whatsoever, instead of being compared to the current one, because that is usually a moot argument for all specs, since they usually nerf the current tier sets if they end up becoming slightly stronger than the new ones, because Blizzard wants you to use the new gear that they put in the new patch. Not to mention that, as a slight caveat or as a slight footnote, the eye levels of all of the gear in 10.2 are going to skyrocket way higher compared to what we have right now, more so invalidating any gear that you have accumulated so far in 10.1.7. As for the playstyle for balance, the tier set doesn't really seem to change too much. It's a little bit of a casting speed increase on Wrath and Starfire, and just more damage from Eclipses. So that's just about it, just flat damage. To be fair, Balance's playstyle is pretty fun on its own, doesn't really need a tier set, although kind of wish the tier set would have been a little bit more interesting. Feral, on the other hand, has a more interesting tier set, I think leagues above in terms of design compared to the current one that it has, which is Dog Poop, and it revolves around Feral Frenzy. Now, overall, the tier set seems to do a lot for Feral's single target, which I think it's kind of where it suffers the most at the moment, and of course does decent AoE damage as well. And what's even more interesting for Feral is that you are looking to be playing Convoke, which that's great. Listen, you can play Convoke whenever you want, that's fine, but in terms of actually optimizing your playstyle, Convoke hasn't really been a choice since Shadowlands, and it's a fun spell, okay? It's been really cool for Feral, and it's great to see it back. When it comes to Bear, Bear can just sit in a steaming hot pile of... It's bad, okay? It's bad. It's pretty bad. I want to set it on fire. I thought it was good. It looked good in terms of its design, but the numbers are so atrocious. Listen, if they fix the numbers, the design is actually kind of nice for bear, although it is weird because it's not just the numbers that are the problem, it's also how the set functions. And it's a little bit counterintuitive. Now, you gain an absorb shield based on the damage that you did during Rage of the Sleeper, and you can reflect some of that damage back. The problem is that you're likely going to be playing Urso's Fury still, since it's a really good defensive talent, and the absorb from Urso's Fury goes first before the tier set, and you might not even get able to get the absorb back. Now, I've tested this on PTR, and it seems like the absorb, depending on how big the pool is and how much damage you do, can go like 1 million or more absorb. At the moment, with the current eye level, I can imagine this can probably double your HP bar, which I guess that's nice. That's a big absorb, but that means you will probably not want to play Urso's Fury, and without playing that, because I took that out, feels weak. Bear still feels kind of squishy because you're losing the current tier set, which gives you a lot of everything. Plus, the damage return back is just atrocious. I think even if they quadruple the damage that you deal back, it would still feel pretty bad. All in all, just needs more tuning. Hunter Beast Mastery has probably finally one of the coolest tier sets ever. I've taken a better look at it, and of course listened to other more experienced players. I know Max did a tier list ranking, and Azure talked about the BM Hunter quite a bit, and it does a couple of things that I didn't know about, which makes it even cooler. But not to mention that the damage increase for BM Hunter from the tier set is pretty high. What is it? 4% on 2-piece and 18% on 4-piece, which is likely going to get nerfed. Now, that's fine. The numbers on tier sets are tuned consistently all throughout a PTR's life cycle, so that's not necessarily new or surprising. But what is really cool is that the mechanic of the tier set just brings all of the pets into combat, which is something that you definitely want to do as a Beastmaster. Otherwise, you're just playing marksmanship, and it is fun to see all of them and actually do good. I think they should take this tier set and bake it into the talents in 11.0 maybe, because having your dire beasts actually not just be dots that look like pets is way more interesting and definitely needs to be baked into the spec. Not to mention Call of the Wild will finally be played. More on that in a second. Marksmanship is and survival is even more I will probably just play marksmanship and survival just like maybe for some content, but I don't see them topping Beastmaster in terms of fun and interesting playstyles at all. Survival is kind of cool with Fury of the Eagle, but that's about it. For the warrior, the arms gets an interesting bleed playstyle with the tier set that its damage is, you know, we'll see how it's going to get tuned. I tested it a little bit in the raid. It's kind of very hard to optimize without proper weak cars. I didn't have all the weak cars properly set up, but there's a couple of things to track, and the procs are wonky, and the procs are kind of buggy as well, where they don't actually work as they intended. But, you know, looking at this from the perspective of, oh, this will definitely get fixed by 10.2 launch, right? So I'm not gonna take the bugs into consideration. The playstyle is interesting. Execute is back, baby. You're gonna be executing a lot, and you're gonna be bleeding your target a lot with execute. Ignore pain is changed, and the rage is going to be a problem, and more on that in a second. So that is part of the difficulty of playing this tier set, because you kind of want to play a lot of bleed, specifically since some of the bleed talents have been changed, and the bleed talents give you rage, so even more of an issue. We'll see. Fury is actually really fun. Odin's Fury is a freaking amazing talent, and the playstyle that you're probably going to want to be playing is slightly different, more so that you're going to be playing some talents that you haven't played yet, which is really cool. I forgot the talent was it Reckless Abandon, where it turns your Bloodthirst and your Raging Blow into improved versions. You're going to be playing Bloodbath, which is really cool, but the playstyle will be very simple. You're probably just going to be pressing Bloodthirst and Rampage, and because these cooldowns are going to be so important, you're probably going to also be playing Annihilator, since you don't really want to press Raging Blow, and Raging Blow is just a non-issue. Might as well take Annihilator, right? And that can get old really quickly, but hey, it's definitely an interesting take from ARMS, so that's probably gonna be really cool. Protection also getting a way better tier set than the bear gets at the moment. The damage in single target is actually really good. Dude, when we've raid tested with protection, the damage was stupid, okay? I don't know if it's gonna get nerfed. I'm not saying it's gonna get nerfed, but I'm saying the damage was pretty good, okay? okay. The AoE, I haven't been able to test it so much, but as far as I know from everybody testing Protection Warrior, it's okay, sure. And also has a bleed playstyle similar to arms and a lot of damage reduction baked into the tier set, which is always really good. It feels kind of, but not really, like what Bear got last season, where, you know, the tier set gives you a lot of damage and a lot of tankiness all baked into the same rotation, which is nice. And we'll see if Prot Warrior rises in the rankings. Death Knight gets for Unholy and Frost some really cool bangers, not as much for Blood. Unholy essentially just gets a lot of love to Magus of the Dead, which is cool because it's just going to launch Shadow Bolts in AoE, and that's what you want for a Necromancer, I mean an Unholy class, because that is really cool to just summon strong ghouls and skeletal mages and things like that. Is this Diablo? Just shoot balls of shadow all over the place. That is really, really cool. The thematic is really nice. The numbers are probably going to be okay. Once again, we don't have the exact buffs, but tier set is going to be fine. I think the numbers are just going to be tuned. Frost is getting a lot of love to Chill Shriek. Listen, if you don't like Chill Shriek, I don't know what you're doing here, dude. Chill Shriek is amazing, and you will have to talent it because it is how your tier set is going to work. It is one of the coolest abilities that Frost has outside of Breath of Sindragosa, which is great because nobody really likes Breath of Sindragosa. However, Chill Shriek is on the path to Breath, and I don't know. I hope we're not forced into playing Breath of Sindragosa because that's gonna suck. But other than that, Chill Shriek is pretty cool. Blood is poop, similar to Bear, although maybe even worse. The 2-piece and the 4-piece are interesting in terms of concept, but they're not implemented properly, where the 2-piece is essentially invalidated by the 4-piece because once you're going to be using your Soul Reaper or Abomination's Limb, then the 2-piece just as if it doesn't exist. So that is a fundamental issue with Blood's tier set that needs to be addressed before the patch launches. Now we can talk about the talents and playstyles because that's also an important criteria as to why you should play a certain class or a certain spec. Balance gets changes and could potentially play Orbital Strike now, since it's no longer going to be a choice node with Pulsar, which for me, by choosing this class, is what made me fall in love with Balance at the end of Shadowlands when the new talents were put in, and you could actually play both Orbital Strike and Pulsar at the same time. The playstyle is fantastic. It is so fun. The spells are so cool to press. You get really good damage and really good burst, and they are all rotating around celestial alignment, so you're not just focused on one big cooldown. You have minor other things that you can do, and it just plays so cool. Now that's what I tested on the PTR. I don't know if that's going to be the best build. I hope it will be because it is fun, but at the very least I can take Pulsar and not have to worry about never having to play Orbital Strike. Feral is probably a little bit more interesting in the way that it plays Feral Frenzy. I mean, you play Feral Frenzy here and there, that's fine, but Feral Frenzy gives you really quick burst damage windows, which is really nice, and I don't know if Feral really had that. Tiger's Fury is okay. I don't know if it offered you like burst windows. Like in AoE, you kind of have Tiger's Fury pretty much always, and Feral Frenzy gives you 20% damage increase. If it remains the same, that means that every 30 seconds, because the tier set also reduces the cooldown of Feral Frenzy, you're gonna have right now 8 seconds of 20% damage increase plus some fire damage, which is okay, it's whatever. And if you're even going to be playing Convoke, that's gonna be very fun. Although I'm a balanced player at heart, it's looking like Feral could top Balance in terms of fun from this tier set. Bear is horrible. I want to move on because the tier set right now just makes Bear super strong, and losing it will feel very bad, not to mention because the new tier set is just horrendously weak, and the feeling of becoming weaker in a patch where you're getting more gear is not a feeling that I'm looking forward to. Beast Mastery Hunter, I already talked about how cool the tier set is, but now that you're actually going to be playing Call of the Wild with even a cooler choice node, makes actually managing pets a lot more interesting. Some of the talent nodes in the tree are also being squished so that it doesn't require 3-pointers, which I've complained about for 10 months. How long has it been? Jesus. The people from the True Shroud Lodge have theory crafted some builds where you don't run through the hunt, and that's really interesting, but you're going to be having a lot of pets, and you're going to be having an actual interesting pet cooldown in Call of the Wild that's going to give you a gazillion kill commands. Beastmastery still has some issues that will need to be reworked eventually, and we'll have a video on it, but we're going to be moving on to Marksmanship and Survival, and we're going to go past them all the way into Arms Warrior, because Arms Warrior is probably the most ridiculous tier set that they have released, since it's just weird. You get Execute procs, and when you hit Execute, you just slam with Thunderclaps, because Execute doesn't do any AoE damage, and you kind of have to have AoE damage in a tier set, otherwise it's just poop. So they just kind of felt like they threw a Thunderclap. Now, in terms of the actual playstyle, it's looking like at least the raid build doesn't really change much. You're probably going to be hitting maybe the biggest problem that Arms has, which is very hard for me to wrap my head around when I'm thinking of what to main, because the Rage is is actually an issue. Rage is a problem. You're getting a lot of rage, and ignore pain no longer contributes to your rage spending mechanics from anger management and all of that, which is weird and don't like that system. But that aside, I tested it in the raid and I still couldn't prevent overcapping rage, and I tried to take all of the talents that increase the rage cost of my abilities. I tried to play Skull Splitter with the baked-in mechanics of Skull Splitter and Tides of Blood, I think the talent is called, because it's a bleed build and you want bleed, but Skull Splitter, which interacts with bleed, also gives you rage, and that's weird because you just have so much rage already and you don't really have good things to spend it on. All of these things need to be kind of fixed for arms to actually feel good, because Fury doesn't seem to have these issues. Fury is just a train, has the gas on the floor, and it doesn't have any brakes because the mechanic didn't install any, because you don't really need to. You just go. Granted, the playstyle is very simple. You're just gonna be hitting Bloodbath or Bloodthirst once, twice, maybe 3 times at most, and then Rampage, and just cycle this in until you're going to get Odin's Fury back and just slap Odin's Fury again. It is very fun. Obviously in AoE you're going to, you know, put some whirlwinds up, and that is okay. Annihilator is kind of fun, but the fact that you're only really playing 2 buttons and the tier set really wants all of your globals to be Bloodthirst, it's kind of hard to bake in more abilities. You're probably not going to be playing Onslaught. You're definitely not going to be playing Raging Blow, and I don't even know if Ravager is going to be a button that you're pressing. Maybe in Mythic Plus. We'll see how that plays out. And Protection Warrior has been kind of like an okay choice for me in Dragonflight. The playstyle has been simplified a lot, and it doesn't look like 10.2 will add any more death, which I personally enjoyed for Protection Warrior back at the end of Shadowlands. And the tier set does make some things interesting, and once again, it's a very heavy shield slam playstyle, which I don't particularly mind, but that's kind of what I've been playing for almost 2 years on Protection Warrior. And although that's cool, Fury gets to play Odin's Fury, and a lot of other classes get to play other spells and playstyles that I haven't played so far, so kind of feels like Prod is more of the same. Speaking of changes, Unholy gets maybe some of the biggest changes out here in this list, where its damage profile is consistently moved away from Army of the Dead, and I think baked a little bit into Apocalypse. Essentially, you're going to be relying a lot less on Big Burst, Power Infusion, Augmentation Druid playstyles, and more on your what's looking like to be the 45-second cooldown, which is, well, it's Apocalypse, because that's the tier set that, you know, summons more Magus of the Dead, and, you know, Dark Transformation, Unholy Blight, and so on, which is great because that's a big change from being a 3-minute one-trick pony to being a 45-second beast. Now, the numbers obviously are subject to change. We don't know exactly what the final iteration is, but playstyle-wise, it's looking delish. Same with Frost Death Knight. Last time I played Chill Streak was in BFA, when you could get that essence, the PvP essence that gave you the Chill Streak talent, because that was a PvP talent, and they finally baked it into the talent in Dragonflight, but it was never really good, and it kind of felt like it conflicted with Breath of Sindragosa in terms of its playstyles, and it's also on the track towards Breath of Sindragosa, and I really hope they don't make Breath mandatory. I think Frost Death Knight right now in 10.1.7 has maybe one of the best designs it ever has, outside of an actual rework to put more things into it, where you can actually play both Breath and Obliteration, and I haven't seen these playstyles be more close, at least at a higher echelon, because when I look at the logs to study all of those tier lists, I just see Breath and Obliteration back to back, which is great. I hope that 10.2 doesn't stray away from that, because that would suck, because that's what makes Frost cool. And Blood just needs a lot of fixes similar to Bear. Until that's done, I'm not sure exactly how much Blood will pull me towards DK, but Frost and Unholy are delish once again. And the last thing that you need to be aware of, and of course something that I'm obviously thinking about when I'm choosing a main, is what the goals in WoW are, because based on the goals you can have a more sophisticated choice. Obviously, if your goal is super hyper competitiveness, like, I don't know, getting Hall of Fame or pushing keys to get into MDI or anything like that, obviously you're going to be playing Flavor of the Month specs. At that point, this video is kind of null and void. But if your goal is to have fun, then performance doesn't really matter, how strong the tier set doesn't really matter. If you like the classes in general and you don't really care about anything else, then it doesn't really matter if the playstyle is fun, because you just like the class. Now, for me, the goal is raiding with the boys in the guild, because that's really fun. I like to log in at night, grab a beer. I'm drinking water, grab a tea, and just laugh and joke and kill bosses. I love raiding in WoW. It's cool to kill the big dragon, but only with people that I care about. Now, that aside, I'd also like to push some plus 20 keys, so, you know, getting a spec that kind of mildly performs really well, that is also really important, which is why I came to the conclusions so far. Balanced Druid has always been really cool. Feral has always surprisingly done really well despite not being that popular. Death Knight is always pushing 20s, whether it's Frost or Unholy, and Warrior is good no matter what. And Hunter, you know, Hunter's fun, it's ranged. Okay, now a little part of me is also waiting for arenas to become fun again because the PvP season is and has been for about 2 years now. But because of the goals that I have, I usually really want to play a class that's a little bit more versatile, which although I put Hunter here, I usually like to play mains that have a tank spec. Since I do keys with Marcelian, Mokti, and Sunshade and everybody in our friends group, sometimes we need a tank, and I like to feel like I can tank. Plus I like to tank, but I don't particularly like tanking in raids, which is why mostly my main will revolve around maining a DPS spec. Tanking in raid for me is not very fun because it gets incredibly boring once you actually have good gear, and that seems to happen very fast nowadays. And the tank bosses are not that big. Tanks are usually the last ones to be geared in a good guild because you don't really need the tanks to be that geared. Tanking is just particularly easy now. It's way more interesting in Mythic Plus, which is why I like to have a main that can DPS really coolly in raid like Balance or an Arms Warrior and have a strong tank for Mythic Plus. And when you pick a main, these are kind of the things that you should be looking for. Is the class fun? Because the playstyle is definitely a big factor into you enjoying the class. Do you get some cool stuff to play with? Since, you know, now Warrior and DK are getting a two-handed legendaries, which is obviously a choice to be considered when you're playing these classes in 10.2 because, you know, two-handed legendary strength. Who doesn't want an axe like that, right? But also, you know, you kind of have to be able to achieve your goals. If you just want to chill, that's fine. But if you want to push some content, you probably want to play something that you're either really good at or something that can obviously perform. Usually the balance is fairly nicely tuned in Dragonflight where everybody can just do everything so far. So that usually doesn't happen to be an issue. But at the beginning of the patch, it's usually a little bit wonky until things settle in. And speaking of patch, we covered everything that's coming in 10.2 and more on this video that you should check out to get ready for the 10.2 madness. Have some fun, pick your main.